Hello and welcome to the Crimson Stitchery. My name is Anushka and this video answers a viewer question, which is how do I take my knitting to the next level? This is something that quite a lot of people have asked me about in the past. People have said things like, oh, I would love to make a sweater or a cardigan, but I've got no idea, I don't have the skills to do that. Or they've said, oh, I like to knit, but I only know how to knit blankets, baby blankets. Or, oh, I've made a baby garment, for example, but I could never attempt something for an adult, I don't know where to start. So if this is you and you're an enthusiastic beginner, or you're an improver knitter, or you've been knitting for a long time but you'd like to know a little bit more about how to, change up your skill set and maybe try something new, this video is for you. So as always, the show notes can be found below this video in the down bar here on YouTube, and I'll provide links for any of the resources that I mentioned in this video. So I thought about this quite a lot and I've come up with 5 main tips for how to take your knitting to the next level. Number 1, choose your patterns wisely. So every new knitting project that you tackle is an opportunity to learn a new skill. So as much as it is really enjoyable to, finish one thing and maybe have all of that excitement and want to make another version of what you've just done, actually, my advice to you would be, with every new knitting project that you take on, make sure that it's got something in it that is new that you haven't done before. So for example, if you have knitted a garter stitch scarf and you want to learn to purl, then maybe look at something with ribbing so that you can practice your purl stitch and then practice knit and purl together. Or if you want to try lots of different stitch patterns and textures, maybe you could consider knitting a series of swatches, small squares about, let's say 20 centimeters by 20, which is about 8 by 8 squares. You could knit 12 or 16 of those, every one in a different stitch pattern. Garter stitch, stocking stitch, different combinations of rib, maybe cables, maybe colour work. You could use that as an opportunity and then sew them together and have it as a blanket or throw, either like for a sofa or maybe for a baby or a child. After you learn to knit and purl, the 2 basic stitches, the next thing really to learn is about shaping, so increases and decreases. And a great way to learn that is by knitting hats or knitting fingerless mittens, or normal mittens really too. Honestly, once you've learned to knit and purl and increase and decrease, I promise you that you're ready to take on any other kind of knitting project that's out there. So yeah, my main advice is to think about what it is that you'd like to learn, and look for patterns that will specifically allow you to practice that and try out those new skills and techniques. Don't just keep knitting the same thing. Even if you're avoiding complicated textures and you actually just want to stick with plain things but try different types of garments, so from knitting something flat to in the round, that's already something new to practice. If you've already knit a very simple hat, you could look at a hat, instead of from the bottom up, from the top down, for example, or you could try a different type of increase or decrease stitch, because there are several. So this leads me on to my second point of advice, which is to build up a library of knitting resources, a physical library as well as a mental one, and just really think about where can you get the information from. So here I've pulled out some books from my bookshelf. 3 out of 4 of them came to me secondhand, either from a charity shop, a thrift store, or this Reader's Digest book I got off my grandma, and it's what my mum used to knit and crochet in the 1970s. I don't have the actual books that I learned to knit from anymore because they were library books. And also these days there's just so much available on YouTube, online freely, or you can go to a local library or you can collect your own resources from around the web. But whatever it is, start building up that personal library and that knowledge bank. So I thought I'd just talk about these books that I've got here. So 2 books that were really key to me learning to knit were the Stitch and Bitch books. Does anyone remember these? Is anyone watching that came across these? This is actually the second Stitch and Bitch book, and the first one talks about learning to knit in much more detail, but I don't even have that anymore because I passed it on to a friend that wanted to learn to knit and it just never came back to me. So this is the second one. And then the other book that was really instrumental in me learning to knit was the Reader's Digest Guide to Needlework. You can find these secondhand, these books, for next to nothing, and they are such amazing resources with incredibly clear, detailed and in-depth information. So I really, really recommend them. I'll put links to these books down below. And this one is a complete guide to needlework. So knitting is actually only one chapter of all of the things that it covers. But basically, when it came to either the Stitch and Bitch book or the Reader's Digest book, ooh, they're a bit heavy, what it was when I first learned to knit, I literally did it page by page. So I started off, you know, learning the knit stitch, learning the purl stitch, then I felt like I needed to learn how to hold yarn properly, so I did that, and I literally just went through the book, you know, oh, garter stitch, stocking stitch, moss stitch, rib stitch, and just tried those out on small projects. And then as I turned the pages, I thought, okay, increasing and decreasing, that's the next thing to learn. Learning how to read patterns, and then it very quickly gets on to different types of shaping, knitting in the round. So what I'm saying essentially is, if you've got a really good resource book, then that will tell you exactly what it is that you need to know. And it's just a case of browsing through the book and looking at what is out there and thinking about what you need to cover in your patterns. Now, a lot of the time these kind of resource and guidebooks have got patterns. That's the case for the Reader's Digest and this Stitch and Bitch book, which was a great source of quick and easy, small beginner projects, many of which I don't have anymore because I gave away as gifts. But if you are instead using an individual pattern, maybe a PDF that you bought off Ravelry, maybe something that someone has given you or recommended, or maybe you found a pattern in a book, a pattern book. These days, the techniques and skills covered by all of the patterns are generally listed quite clearly, either laid out for you when you buy the pattern in the description, you know, what are the things that you need to do. Or what you can do is actually, when you buy the pattern, they often use a lot of abbreviations. So the guide to the abbreviations might be at the beginning or the end. But if you just scan through those abbreviations, you'll quite quickly see what it is that you need to know. So, you know, if there's a bunch of stuff about knit two together and, you know, SSK and all of that kind of stuff, you'll know that you need to learn about different types of increases and decreases. Or if there are other kind of things that are going on, just need to find a way to look those up. You can look it up on the internet, or you can go into your resources, look into the index, and find out what it is that you need to know. So when you're choosing your patterns, the knowledge that you're applying really needs to go hand in hand with your resources and your guides. So basically, don't just pick any old pattern, but really think about what is it that you need to practice. I'll just talk about the other two books that I've got on my lap. This one is Vogue Knitting, The Ultimate Guide. I think that this has been updated now, so I'll put a couple of links to the various editions that are available. And it actually covers similar information to the Reader's Digest, but sometimes it's got a bit more information. And it's just been updated, basically. So yeah, that's been really handy to refer to when there's something that I need to know that's not in the Reader's Digest. So the other one I've got is Montse Stanley's Hand Knitter's Handbook. This is an amazing book. Montse Stanley is a Spanish and British author, and she doesn't seem to be as well known, at least on internet kind of knitting circles, but her books are all amazing. Honestly, they are like treasure troves of information. I often felt like if I had one of her books, I actually didn't need anything else. And she's very no nonsense, you know, it's kind of straight to the point. Here's the information, no fluff. So I think that is the thing about these knitting resource books. They're a little bit, they can feel a bit sparse in the language, whereas I think that when we buy patterns these days, the culture of how patterns are written has changed an awful lot in the last 15 years or so. That they kind of hold your hand a lot more, whereas these books, they'll just show you what you need to do and they just expect you to get on with it. And if you can cope with that, or if you can learn to just kind of deal with the fact that sometimes you just need to take a bit of a dive into the unknown and just do it, just have a go, follow the diagrams, you know, or the video or whatever it is, and just see what will happen in front of you. Actually, that is an amazing way to learn, and it will ultimately build up your confidence in a really durable and long-lasting way. You know, if you really understand the ins and outs of all of these techniques, what it is that you're doing and why it is that you're doing it, you're ultimately going to become a much, much more knowledgeable knitter. My third tip for getting onto the next level with your knitting is to embrace scale. So what do I mean by this? Basically, think about projects that you can do that will challenge you, that will teach you lots of new techniques, that will give you the opportunity to practice new things that are ultimately at a smaller scale. So the first thing that I'll say is to embrace accessories. I've already mentioned hats and fingerless mittens. These kind of things are very tiny, ultimately. You know, they're not huge, they're not big like a sweater with massive sleeves, but it's kind of like a blank canvas where you will be able to play around with a whole host of techniques, textures and different construction methods. You'll basically be able to try out nearly everything that is on the book on an accessory. So as an example, I've got you this little cap, which is Little Red Cap. It's a pattern that I designed quite a few years ago now and is available on Ravelry. And on this hat, you've got, quite obviously, you've got lace in this portion here. You've also got cables, you've got decreases coming into the crown, a few increases too for shaping, and there's a very, very neat knitted hem. So in order to do a knitted hem, you're learning that, but you're also learning the provisional cast on, so a new cast on. And I'll just pop it on so you can see. It's sort of a fairly close fitting, yet with a bit of slouch kind of cap, so it's not like a typical beanie. So you're also learning about different types of shaping and the effects that that produces. It's a bit lumpy because I actually wear it all the time underneath my cycling helmet. So yeah, that's just one example. Another example that I've got to give you is a sock. So here I've got my red brick socks pattern, and socks is, sometimes people feel a little bit nervous about socks to do with the heel, but again, if you've got your resources available to you and you know where to look if you need help, and you know, you embrace the fact that it's, you know, you can just unravel it or learn how to unravel it and fix mistakes, but there's nothing to be scared of in the sock. So here you've got twisted ribbing, so you're learning a stretchy cast on, twisted ribbing. I designed this sock pattern specifically with kind of beginners and improvers in mind, people that wanted to do something simple but would just give them that little bite, you know, just that little hook to keep it interesting and not just completely plain. So here we've got a very simple knit and purl stitch pattern that's got a lovely little texture, so that's also teaching you about texture, shadow, how different stitches relate to each other, but you obviously you could just leave it plain if you wanted to. Then we've got a sock heel, which is teaching you short rows, picking up stitches, increases and decreases again. So you can see they're pretty key to knitting. Knit, purl, increase and decrease, and honestly you're on your way. Measuring your body and measuring your foot, you'll learn how to do that. You'll learn what works and what doesn't. Knitting a sock will teach you about ease, zero ease, positive and negative. Again, you'll see what that actually means when it comes to your body, what that means when it comes to fabric, how the knitted fabric responds to your body, you know, your body heat ultimately when you're finished with it. The action of wearing a sock, you'll learn so much about the characteristics and properties of knitted fabric. So things like hats, socks and gloves will really teach you an awful lot. And I would really say embrace small accessories, and personally my advice would be to avoid scarves, because scarves, in order to wrap around an adult neck at least once, scarves have got to be pretty long, and it's quite a long time practicing exactly the same thing. So maybe that's something that you need, but my advice would be, instead of making a scarf, actually make a smaller strip and sew it round into a tube, so you're learning how to sew knitting, and make a cowl. Much quicker. Okay, the other thing when I say embrace scale is also think about baby knits. So if you really want to learn to make a hat, but you don't have enough time to commit to it, or you just you feel unsure, try a baby hat. It's going to take you a quarter of the time. Also, you could try out garments, a whole host of different styles on a baby item, and just because it's physically smaller, so remember, embrace scale, embrace something that is smaller, that will actually just be quicker. Now, I think baby and child items are a really great thing to practice, because ultimately the recipient is not going to be that fussy, unless you're knitting for, you know, a 3 or 4 year old who's going through a difficult stage. But at the end of the day, as long as the parents are happy, and I'm pretty sure they'll be happy if it looks cute and if it's in a nice colour, they're just going to be really thrilled to have the item. So, you know, it's kind of a win-win situation, because you'll look like a great friend, and also the recipient will just end up wearing it. So yeah, they're not that fussy, so potentially easier than knitting for adults. It's quicker than adult garments as well. Also, I feel like baby and child items are a little bit low stakes, because at the end of the day, they're not going to wear it more than 6 months, probably maybe a year if you're lucky. They're going to outgrow them. So after you finish your garment and, you know, improve vastly, you don't need to worry about being, I don't know, embarrassed about what level you were at before, because it's going to be put away at the bottom of the drawer. When it comes to baby and child garments, I highly recommend looking for yarns that are machine washable. So either superwash wool or cotton, 100% cotton. And also, if you try out these different yarns, because a lot of the time I think beginners use acrylics or various different synthetic yarns, or superwash wool, but maybe not so much cotton. And so again, it's a great way to learn about how to knit with a new fibre, how the fibre will react, how the fibre will wear, what it feels like. Some people have no problem knitting with cotton, others will struggle. So if you have the opportunity to actually practice whatever your opinions are on knitting with cotton yarn, you will actually end up improving quite a lot. Related to the issue of scale is tip number 4. Thick yarn is your friend. Thick yarn is your friend. Avoid 4-ply, fingering, baby yarns, anything that is thin. You want to be knitting projects that will knit up in front of you. You want to be making things that will grow and that actually have a chance of getting finished. You want to be making projects where if you make a mistake and have to unravel the whole thing, that won't take that long. And also it won't take that long to re-knit it, because it's just going to be quicker. There's fewer stitches on the needle when your gauge is bigger, basically, when your yarn is heavier and the numbers in the swatch are smaller. So you want to be thinking about Aran to worsted weight yarns, and heavier ideally. So my little red cup is knit in an Aran weight yarn, which is a heavy worsted in US terms. I also wanted to mention my red brick socks pattern, because I did write that for 2 gauges of yarn, again with beginners to improvers in mind, because it has the option for a sport weight sock, which is a light DK. So in terms of socks, obviously if you make an Aran weight sock or worsted weight sock, it's going to be very thick and heavy, so it'd be great for wearing in heavy boots or around the house. But a sport weight or a light DK sock, like I've got the pattern for, should fit in normal shoes, you know, obviously not stilettos, but they should fit in, you know, your average pair of dress shoes, say, as they're not that much thicker than the average sock yarn 4-ply fingering weight. So I've gone for the sport weight, and I really recommend that. So the projects with thicker yarn will just knit up quicker, you'll see it happening, you'll finish it quicker, you'll be really excited and motivated that you've made something and really ready to move on, embrace the next challenge, try the next thing out and cast on the next project. Tip number 5, my last tip, is to challenge yourself and persevere. Don't give up. If you knit something and it goes horribly wrong, it is not the end of the day. Don't forget that when you see things online, and what you tend to see out and about is the result of thousands of hours of practice and often many years, but there is nothing stopping you from getting there. And you know, if you follow the other tips that I've given you in this video, by, you know, using heavier yarn, knitting smaller things, you yourself are going to be soon on your way down that path. Challenge yourself. Don't just keep knitting the same thing again and again. Actively look out for projects that will teach you something new, that will push your skill set, that will ultimately make you a more experienced knitter. And by the by, for those wondering, yes, I'm sure that all of these tips will go for crochet as well. If you have knit a couple of hats, no one in your family wears hats, you can't get rid of them, you're bored of it, and you just really are yearning and longing to make a sweater, what's stopping you? Nothing is stopping you. Just have a go. Again, pick a pattern with a heavy yarn, you know, maybe go for a slightly easier texture at the beginning. But if you can do the knit stitch, you know how to cast on and cast off, and you learn how to increase and decrease, you can make a sweater. These are all the first skills. They're the first chapters in all of the technique books. There is absolutely nothing stopping you. So be brave, but also be realistic. If it's one of your first sweaters, maybe don't pick something that is really heavily cabled, because that takes a long time. Make sure that you practice certain things on your swatches. So, you know, do swatch and have a go at textures and different techniques on a smaller scale before you put it on your garment. But if you want to go with the wind and you really don't want to swatch, which is a topic for another day, just accept the fact that the first time you do something, it might not look amazing, but you'll have done it and you'll have learned something. And even if you've got it wrong and you learn how to fix it, that's actually incredibly, incredibly valuable. And again, it will make you much more flexible and knowledgeable in years to come when you are knitting like the wind and winning competitions. So challenge yourself, embrace things that are difficult, accept that it might not be perfect straight away, and actually I think that when things are not perfect straight away, that's often better, because if we can learn how to improve, then we're going to keep learning overall, and we're never going to be bored by this really vibrant, lively and creative craft that we all are enjoying. So I hope that you have found that helpful, and as always, I would love to know what you think. Let me know if you follow any of these tips, try them out, and if you find this video helpful, and let me know what else have you done to take your knitting to the next level. Is there anything else that you've tried that I haven't covered? I'd be so interested to find out. So for anyone new to the channel, the Crimson Stitchery is a video channel about making all that is beautiful and useful. So it's about knitting, mending, sewing, it's about craft, and it's about lifestyle. It's about living in a way that doesn't compromise on either ethics or aesthetics. Join me for a podcast episode which I film 1 to 2 times a month, as well as shorter videos like this where I share tips, advice and film tutorials, as well as other activities like interviews and visits and vlogs. So if you haven't already, please do click the subscribe button down below and give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to leave me a comment letting me know what you think. Have you followed any of my advice? Have you tried this already? What have you found to be the most helpful when it comes to taking your knitting to the next level? Thanks for watching. See you soon.